an interesting question arises in John 1:13, where we have the rather laboured statement of John, as it might appear, that Christians are born not of the will of men, not of sexual desire, not of the desire of the flesh, but born of God. And so it is an interesting fact, and one wouldn't want to be absolutely dogmatic here, although many scholars have thought this to be true, including the Jerusalem Bible, not the New Jerusalem Bible, the Jerusalem Bible, the first one, that actually the verb there should be who was begotten, fathered, procreated, not who were, referring to Christians, but a reference to the virginal begetting of Jesus. This, of course, would be highly useful, because it would simply confirm Matthew and Luke's account of the origin of the Son of God. What if we have that right there in John 1:13? It's simply a matter of the verb there, the aorist form of yenao, in the passive form either being singular or plural. What if we read Jesus, who was begotten, fathered, not from the will of man, not from normal human procedure, but by God himself? That's entirely possible, although it doesn't appear as such in the Greek manuscripts. Metzger is helpful in pointing out that several ancient witnesses, chiefly Latin, Irenaeus, Tertullian, Origen, Ambrose, Augustine, and Pseudo-Athanasius, read the singular number, Jesus, who was begotten, not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but begot. A direct reference to the virginal begetting of Jesus right there in John 1:13. The Curetonian Syriac and 6 manuscripts of the Peshitta Syriac seem to be muddled. They have those and then the verb in the singular, so that just seems to be a jumble. Doesn't make much sense, but it does suggest that some fiddling of the text may have gone on at this point. A number of modern scholars, including Zahn, the famous German Zahn, Resch, Blas, Loisy, Seeberg, Bernet, Büchsel, Boismart, and Dupont, and another German, Braun, have argued for the originality of the singular verb there. And that's, I think, quite interesting. Now, there is a confirmation of this possibility, at least, let's say, a support in a major way for this possibility that John 1:13 should read as a singular reference to the virginal begetting of Jesus, not the born again of the children of God, Christians. But in 1 John 5:18 we have the very remarkable statement that the one who was begotten, in the aorist tense, the one who was begotten by God keeps the Christians, preserves the Christians. Now, you don't want to read the King James Version here from inferior manuscripts, but the best manuscripts there have a definite aorist passive form of that same verb, yenao, exactly as we have the aorist passive of the form eyeniti in John 1:13. This is actually a participle. The one who was begotten, procreated, is a reference there to the Son, Jesus. And he's the one who keeps those Christians who have been begotten. When we're speaking of Christians being begotten anew in their spiritual conversion, we always have in John the perfect tense of the verb. But when we're speaking of Jesus in 1 John 5:18, we have the aorist. And there again we have the aorist in that possible corrected text in John 1:13. Further to that, we must say that in Isaiah 9:6, unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given. The child there and the son, of course, are in parallel. It's the same thing. It's not two different things, two different events. And there, remarkably, you have the same aorist passive of yenao, a divine passive indeed. So we would have a direct reference to the virginal begetting in Isaiah 9:6. Unto us a son has been begotten by God, that is. That's exactly, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, who was begotten by God. There would be a confirmation then, purely in harmony, strictly in harmony with Matthew and Luke's explicit accounts of the origin of the Son, where there's no pre-existence of the Son at all. Not a hint of God the Son. The whole origin of Jesus encapsulated in Luke 1:35. Because of the miracle in Mary, this child that Mary is going to bear will be the Son of God. Matthew, even more explicitly, Matthew 1:18, that which is begotten, not just conceived. Yes, it was a conception, but it's the activity of the Father in her, and that's the origin of the Son. Added to that, we have Psalm 2:7, the prophecy that this day, and that's not in eternity in Hebrew Scripture. Eternity is a much later idea of the Church Fathers, but today I have become your Father. I have begotten you, And indeed we have a confirmation of that in the Septuagint version of Psalm 110 verse 3, where we find exactly the same, I have begotten you. And due to a change of pointing in the Hebrew, we lost that in some Hebrew manuscripts. Many still read, I have begotten you, I fathered you, exactly like Psalm 2:7. This is critical because we're talking about the origin of Jesus, and that fact, of course, determines which Jesus we're talking about, whether a pre-human Jesus or not. In every case that we've been discussing, the begetting is strictly in time. And this rules out the later doctrine of the so-called eternal generation of the Son, which simply waffles the whole thing into nonsense. In fact, a leading theologian, MacLeod, in his book on all this, says something about, it's doubtful in his very understated way. He says it's doubtful if we can give any content to the meaning of eternal generation. In other words, it's nonsense, to be quite honestly. To be quite honest about it, this is really a sort of a nonsense statement. Eternal generation is impossible. The whole idea of an aorist tense in Greek, to be begotten, he was begotten, the thing that was begotten, the person that was begotten. An aorist tense tells you, you're talking about a point of time in history. You lose that, and you're then going into this very foggy language of pre-existence. How do you pre-exist yourself?